The black man walked past and my wife's eyes followed him. Disclaimer: this content is only for mature audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. I still remember that afternoon like it was yesterday. The sun was dipping low, the air heavy with silence, and then, just for a moment, everything shifted. We were sitting together, my wife and I, at a little outdoor cafe when a man walked by. He wasn't rushing, wasn't even looking around much. But as he passed, I caught something I hadn't expected. My wife's eyes didn't just glance at him, they followed him. It was the kind of look that stays in your mind, the kind you don't forget easily no matter how hard you try. Maybe you've had that moment too, the kind where you notice something small but it stirs something big inside you. Was it curiosity? Was it admiration? Or was it something more? I couldn't tell. But from that instant, a quiet storm began to build between us. The man himself seemed ordinary on the surface, tall, confident in the way he carried himself, but not trying to stand out. Yet there was something about him that pulled attention. And as my wife's gaze lingered, I felt questions rising that I wasn't ready to ask. Was I overthinking it? Or had I just witnessed the first crack in something I thought was unshakable? Stories like this aren't always about the surface details. They're about what happens underneath, the emotions, the unspoken words, the shifting ground that makes you wonder if you really know the person sitting across from you. That's where the tension lies. That's where this story begins. I'll take you with me through the moments that followed, the way my wife tried to brush it off, the way I tried to convince myself it didn't matter, and the strange way this man would keep showing up in our lives. It wasn't just about jealousy. It was about trust, silence, and the weight of what we don't say out loud. As you listen, I want you to think about your own relationships. What would you do if you caught a glance like that? Do small moments mean nothing? Or do they mean everything? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's open this conversation together. Should trust be so strong that you ignore what you see? Or is it the little signs that tell the biggest truths? Because that single look was just the beginning. What came next tested everything I thought I understood about love, loyalty, and the person I shared my life with. And the question that haunted me most was simple. Was I imagining it all? Or was there something my wife wasn't ready to tell me? The days after that cafe moment didn't pass easily. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, as if rewinding a film I couldn't stop watching. My wife laughed the same way, spoke the same way, and carried on with her routines as though nothing had shifted. But for me, something had. That lingering glance haunted me, like a question that wouldn't leave the room. I didn't want to accuse her of anything, it was just a look after all, but why did it feel like more? We had been married for years, long enough to know each other's habits, moods, even unspoken thoughts. Or at least I believed I did. But lately small things had been piling up. She had become quieter, distracted in moments where she used to be fully present. Sometimes her phone lit up and she'd quickly turn it over, saying it was nothing important. I brushed it aside at first, telling myself not to read into it. Yet after that day at the cafe, every detail seemed magnified. Every silence stretched longer than before. The man who walked past us that afternoon wasn't a stranger for long. I started noticing him around town, in the grocery store, outside the gym, even near our neighborhood park. Always casual, never enough to draw direct suspicion, but enough to make my chest tighten. Was it just coincidence? Or was there something more? Each sighting added another layer to my unease. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that maybe I was the one spinning stories out of nothing. But then in quiet moments, I'd catch my wife drifting off in thought. Sometimes her eyes carried a distance that I couldn't quite reach. When I asked what was wrong, she'd smile and say she was just tired. But the smile never reached her eyes. The tension between us grew in unspoken ways. Dinner conversations became shorter, filled with pauses that used to be laughter. I felt myself walking on edge, unsure if speaking my thoughts would make me sound insecure, or if staying silent would let something I feared slip further away from me. As the days went on, I realized this wasn't just about a glance anymore. It was about the cracks in trust that can form quietly, the way shadows grow longer when the sun sets. And deep down, I knew this story was only beginning. Because the man who walked past us once seemed to have a way of never really leaving. I started paying closer attention, not because I wanted to spy on her, but because I couldn't quiet the unease that had settled in my chest. One evening while I sat in the living room pretending to scroll through my phone, I heard her laugh softly in the kitchen. It was the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in a while, light, unguarded. When I walked in, she quickly ended the call, slipping the phone into her pocket with a smile that felt too quick, too forced. She said it was just a friend from work, but something in her eyes told me she wasn't ready to explain more. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to piece things together. Was I imagining connections that weren't there? Or was the distance between us becoming too real to ignore? In the silence of our bedroom, every shift in her breathing felt like a sign I couldn't interpret. The man himself seemed to move like a shadow in our lives. I noticed him again near the market, not far from where my wife usually stopped after work. He didn't look at me directly, but I could feel a strange recognition when our paths crossed, as if he knew I'd been watching him. That unspoken acknowledgement left me restless, as though I was part of a game I didn't understand. Meanwhile, our friends began to notice subtle changes too. At a dinner gathering, one of them teased that my wife had been glowing lately, asking if she had a new hobby or secret diet. She brushed it off with a laugh, but I caught the flicker of something in her face. A quick shift that made me wonder if there was indeed something hidden. The comment stayed with me long after the evening ended. Even at home, the rhythm of our life began to feel unfamiliar. She spent more time outside, taking walks alone or volunteering for late errands. I wanted to ask her directly, to demand the truth, but I held back. Maybe I was afraid of her answer. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear it. The tension deepened with each passing day. It wasn't just about another man anymore. It was about what his presence uncovered in us. The silence, the glances, the secrets we didn't speak of were creating a story I wasn't sure how to stop. And yet, a part of me sensed that the real storm hadn't even begun. It all came to a breaking point on a Friday evening. My wife said she was heading out for groceries, but she dressed differently than usual. Nothing flashy, just a little more effort than a simple errand seemed to require. I told myself not to overthink it, but as the door closed behind her, something inside me refused to settle. I waited for nearly an hour before I finally gave in to the gnawing thought that wouldn't leave me alone. I grabbed my jacket and followed the familiar route to the market. When I got there, I didn't see her among the aisles or at the checkout. Instead, I spotted her car parked a block away. Engine off, keys out. My heart raced as I looked around, scanning the street. And then I saw him. The same man from the cafe. The same man whose face had started to carve itself into my mind. He was standing across the street, leaning casually against a lamppost, as if waiting for someone. I froze, every thought in my head colliding with the next. Moments later, my wife appeared from a side street I didn't recognize, walking straight toward him. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't hiding. But the calm way she approached him felt more unsettling than anything else. My chest tightened as I watched them exchange a few words I couldn't hear. Their body language wasn't loud or obvious, but it carried a familiarity that cut deeper than any argument could. I stepped back, half hidden by a parked car, unsure of what to do. My mind screamed at me to confront them, but my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I watched in silence, each second feeling heavier than the last. My wife glanced around, almost cautiously, before the two of them started walking together down the street. Not toward the market, not toward home, but somewhere else entirely. The world around me blurred. The lights of the street, the sound of passing cars, the chatter of strangers, all of it faded beneath the roar of my own thoughts. Questions crashed over me. Was this the truth I had been afraid to face? Was I standing at the edge of the moment that would change everything I thought I knew about us? I followed, careful not to be seen, every step drawing me closer to answers I wasn't sure I wanted. The air was thick with tension, and as I trailed behind them, I knew I was walking straight into the heart of the storm I had been dreading. I kept my distance as they turned into a quieter part of town, a stretch of streets I rarely walked through. The lamps flickered, shadows stretched long against the pavement, and the sound of their voices floated back in fragments I couldn't make out. My pulse hammered in my ears, each step carrying me deeper into something I wasn't prepared for. I told myself I would only follow long enough to understand what was happening. But the truth was, I didn't know if I was ready for what I might discover. Then came the first shock. Instead of slipping into a restaurant or some hidden corner, they walked into a small community center I hadn't noticed before. The paint was peeling, the sign barely hanging, but inside the lights glowed warmly. I crept up to a window and peered inside. My wife and the man were standing with a small group of people gathered around tables covered in notebooks, coffee cups, and worn-out binders. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked nothing like the secret meeting I'd imagined in my head. This wasn't a date. It looked organized. For a moment, relief washed over me, but then another wave of confusion crashed in. Why hadn't she told me about this? Why the secrecy, the late-night errands, the careful glances? The man spoke to the group with authority, pointing to papers spread out in front of him. My wife listened intently, nodding, taking notes, leaning in as if she trusted every word he said. The others around them, men and women of different ages, did the same. Whatever this was, it wasn't casual. It was something she was invested in. The longer I watched, the more questions burned inside me. Was this some sort of community project? A class? A private group she hadn't wanted to share with me? And more importantly, why him? Why was this particular man at the center of it all? The same man whose presence had unsettled me from the very beginning. I thought about barging in, demanding an explanation, but I held myself back. Instead, I stayed hidden, trying to read the room through the glass. The man handed my wife a folder, and she accepted it with both hands, her expression serious. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her look so focused, so determined. It struck me then that maybe this wasn't about romance or betrayal in the way I'd first feared. Maybe it was something bigger, something that reached beyond the walls of our marriage. But that realization didn't calm me. It only made the unease grow. Because if my wife was part of something important enough to keep from me, what did that say about the trust between us? And if this man was leading it, then why did her eyes always follow him, even when she thought I wasn't looking? As they wrapped up the meeting, people started filing out, chatting quietly. My wife lingered, still speaking to him. Her body angled toward his in a way that felt far too familiar. My throat tightened as I realized this wasn't just about a glance at a cafe anymore. I was standing at the edge of something far more complicated, and the answers I was chasing might be more dangerous than I'd ever expected. I ducked back into the shadows, my heart pounding, torn between going home and pretending I hadn't seen any of this, or following her further into a story that felt like it was only just beginning. The stakes had shifted, and deep down, I knew that whatever truth I uncovered next could change everything. I couldn't stay in the shadows anymore. My chest felt too heavy, my thoughts too loud. I stepped forward and pushed the door open, the sound of hinges echoing through the quiet room. My wife froze the moment she saw me. The man turned too, his calm face barely shifting, as if he had expected me all along. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with something I couldn't quite name, fear or maybe guilt. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the folder in her hands, at the way she held it like it carried the weight of a secret bigger than both of us. "I should be asking you that," I finally said. "Why didn't you tell me? Why him?" For a long second, no one spoke. Then she sighed, lowering the folder onto the table. "Because I knew you'd misunderstand," she whispered. "This isn't what you think." She explained that the group was part of a community effort, something tied to helping families in our neighborhood with legal and financial struggles. The man was a coordinator, someone who had lived through hardship himself and now guided others through the system. Relief and anger tangled inside me. If that was true, why the secrecy? Why all the late nights, the glances, the silence? She admitted that she'd been afraid I wouldn't support her involvement, that I'd see it as a distraction from our own lives. But then her voice cracked, and she said something that cut deeper than anything else. "I followed him with my eyes that day," she confessed, "because he reminded me of what it feels like to believe in something again. Not because I wanted him, but because I was losing pieces of myself, and I didn't know how to tell you." The room fell quiet. My anger began to soften into something heavier. Guilt. Maybe I had been so busy protecting what I thought was ours that I'd stopped noticing what she needed. But just when I thought the storm had passed, the man stepped closer. His expression was calm, but his words shifted everything again. "You deserve to know," he said. "She came to us not just to help the community, but because she's been hiding something about your family too." I turned to her, stunned. She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. In that moment I realized the conflict between us wasn't only about glances or secrets outside. It was about a truth buried right at home, one she hadn't yet found the courage to tell me. And with that, the real story began. My wife finally lifted her eyes to meet mine, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't try to hide. Her voice trembled as she explained what the man meant. She had discovered old financial records connected to my late father, debts and obligations that had quietly resurfaced after years of being buried. She hadn't told me right away because she wanted to shield me from the stress, and the community group was helping her figure out how to handle it. The man I'd feared all along wasn't her secret lover. He was the one guiding her through the mess, helping her navigate paperwork and legal hurdles I never even knew existed. The weight of those words hit me hard. I had been so focused on suspicion, on protecting my pride, that I hadn't seen she was carrying a burden alone. Anger gave way to something deeper: regret. She hadn't been turning away from me, not in the way I thought. She was trying to hold everything together without breaking me apart in the process. We stood in silence for a long moment, and then she stepped closer, placing her hand in mine. "I should have told you," she admitted softly. "But I was scared of how you'd see me. Scared you'd think I was drawn to someone else when all I wanted was to protect us." Her honesty cut through the fog of doubt, and I realized how far my imagination had taken me. The man gave a small nod before leaving us alone, and in that quiet room we finally talked, really talked, about the distance, the silence, the glances that had driven us apart. It wasn't easy, but it was real. We agreed to face the debts together, to stop letting fear build walls where there should be trust. As we walked back to the car, the night air felt different, lighter. The questions that had once kept me awake now had answers, even if they weren't the ones I expected. I had learned something I wouldn't forget. Trust isn't only about loyalty, it's about sharing the weight of what we fear most. Looking back, I realized that a single glance had nearly broken us, but it had also forced us to confront the truths we kept hidden. And maybe that was the point. Sometimes the cracks in a marriage aren't signs of it ending. They're reminders of where the light still needs to get in.